Well, good morning. It's nice to be here this morning. It's nice to see some of the faces I don't usually see on Sunday morning. So that's always a treat. So it's great to be here. Um, Thankful that David gave me the opportunity to speak this morning. Hopefully everything went great yesterday. From what I've heard, it did go well. So we pray that everybody will now get home safely from the wedding. I wanted to wish all the mothers a happy Mother's Day this morning. And this is a great day to celebrate it. It looks like it's going to be a nice day in terms of the weather. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. You know, I originally had thought about doing a lesson on mothers and was actually starting to prepare for it. And as I got thinking about it, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to change that a little bit. So I decided to do a sermon this morning on Christian women so that I didn't leave out any of the women. I wanted all the women this morning to be included in my message. So that's how I came up with the faithful Christian woman. But before I get started with that, I just wanted to talk about my mothers a little bit. My mom was a great mom, and she was a woman who made so many sacrifices for her family and for her children. My father had a job that caused him to travel a lot. He was gone for a week, 2 weeks. Sometimes he was gone for over a month. And so she was home with 4 children. And now that I'm a parent and have children, I realize what a tremendous responsibility that was to have 4 children to herself. And she did a great job when he was gone and taking care of our home and taking care of her children. And I had many other mothers in my life. I had one grandmother that I wasn't real close to, but she was a good grandmother. And then my dad's mother passed away when he was 11 years old. So I never really got an opportunity to know her. But his second cousin, she was my third cousin, she was 51 when I was born. And she really was my grandmother. And she was a great, great person. And I was thinking about it, and I think a lot of the skills that I have or my attitude towards children and teaching and being with children came from her because she was so good with children. I can remember she would come to our house and she would just spend so much time with us. So she was really a great grandmother. And I have had so many other wonderful mothers in my life. Of course, my wife, Susan, and see my daughters and how good mothers they are. And I had a great mother-in-law and my sisters and so many other women in my life that have been great mothers. So happy Mother's Day, and I just wanted to share a little bit about the mothers that were in my life and are continue to be in my life. So, excuse me on the PowerPoint. I'm really bad at PowerPoint, and I had some problems with it, so we decided to go without it. So what you're going to do this morning, you're going to pretend it's the old days, okay? And we didn't have PowerPoint, so we're going to do that this morning. So the faithful Christian woman. And I wanted to start out by talking about the faithful Christian woman in terms of spiritual responsibilities. And the first spiritual responsibility is to be a faithful Christian. And the first thing I wanted to mention was one who is faithful in attendance. And we see that mentioned in Hebrews 10:25. You know, and I'm not just talking about being faithful in terms of worship. Not that that's not important, and it's probably not the most important, because it is. But there's many other things that's important for women to be in attendance with. Let's talk about Bible classes, or ministry and service activities, or just get-togethers, social get-togethers. So it's so important for women to be present in all these types of activities. Next, one who is faithful in example. And as we read, well, let's read Philippians 3:17. It says, joining together and following my example, brothers and sisters, and just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. So it's so important for women today to be great examples. You know, there was this anti-smoking commercial that came out in 1967. I actually looked at it last night on the internet. And it's a dad, and he's with his little son. He's probably about 3 years old. And the kid is like doing everything the dad does, helping him wash the car and working on the yard, and they showed him like doing everything that his dad was doing. And then he showed him sitting down to rest, and they're sitting next to a tree, and the little boy's sitting there too. And the father lights up a cigarette and places his pack of cigarettes on the ground. And the little boy picks up the cigarettes and looks at him and looks at his dad. So it's great to tell people things, but the most important thing is to be a good example. Because don't forget, children, our family, our friends, our co-workers, maybe you're a student, you have fellow students, and of course other Christians. All these people are watching us day after day. They're watching us. They see how we act. They're seeing how we live out our Christian lives. So it's so important for women and us all to be good examples of faithful Christians. Next, let's talk about being faithful in modesty. And we read in Philippians 2, chapter 9, I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. Now, I know that's in a little bit different context than what we have today, but it's still so very important. It's really hard for women today to deal with this, with the way society is, especially for our young women. There's so much pressure in society to conform, to dress like everybody else dresses. And so that can be extremely difficult. I remember when I was directing up at Camp Hunt, we had some girls that came to camp, and they had shorts that were way too short. And so I asked some of the women, could you go into town and see if you can get some shorts for these girls? And so they went, and they came back, and they did their best, but said, you know what? There's not anything out there that we could buy that were really appropriate for the girls to wear. So it was very difficult. Or walk in the mall during the summer. It's just unbelievable the way some of the girls are dressing when they walk around. So it's difficult. And so that's why as Christian women, it's so important for them to display modesty and what it means to be a good Christian woman. Next, let's talk about spiritual responsibility of being one who seeks God's kingdom first. And this is all about priorities. What are our priorities? And as a woman, they have so many responsibilities, so many things going on in their lives. And it's really, really important to keep that priority first of putting God first and seeking his kingdom. What about one who puts Christ in their lives? We read in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Again, talking about priorities, and not only talking it, but walking it, living a life that is pleasing to God and that has Christ in their lives. Along with being a faithful Christian, second, I want to talk about being a faithful servant. One cannot be a Christian and not be a servant. That's so important. And we have some great examples in the Bible of women who were faithful servants. Let's talk about Phoebe. We look in Romans 16, verses 1 and 2, where it says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church at Centria, that you may welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints, and help her in whatever she may need from you, for she has been a patron of many and of myself as well. And then we see in Acts 9:36, Dorcas, where she was always helping the poor. So we have so many great women examples in the Bible who were great servants. And certainly this congregation has been blessed over and over and over again with women who are great servants and do so much, go above and beyond to serve the Lord and to serve this church family. The third spiritual responsibility I wanted to talk about is being a faithful teacher. Hebrews 5:12 points out the importance of growing in the faith. It says, "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food." So it's so important for women to continue to grow and mature spiritually so that they are able to teach. And we have had so many women who have taught year after year after year. And just what a blessing that is and how important that is. And we continue to have women who make so many sacrifices to teach and do a great job, not only with our children, but with our young people, all of us. Not only teaching children, but also teaching younger women. We read in Titus 2, verses 3 through 5, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. You know, we had the youth rally recently, and I had the opportunity to be one of the people that got to talk to the kids. And as we were talking in our groups, one of the things that I tried to stress to them is that they are the future of the church. And it's important that we continue to train our young people to take over the responsibilities. I mean, I remember when I first came here, and I was a younger person, and there were so many people that trained me and taught me. And so we have the same thing today. It's so important to keep training our young people. And women have especially important responsibility to train young women so that the church can continue to go on and to be successful. Number 2, let's talk about a faithful woman in terms of spousal responsibilities. And the first spousal responsibility I want to talk about is being a faithful helper. In Genesis 2:18, we read, "Then the Lord said, 'It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him.'" And again, you know, all these things go both ways, and this certainly goes both ways with both the husband and the wife. You know, I remember when I was directing at Camp Hunt, and for those of you who have directed, I know there's some here this morning, that is not an easy job. You know, there's times when it goes great, but there's a lot of times that it can be very, very stressful. And I can remember, you know, having something going on and going down to our cabin and telling Susan, we need to talk. And we go down to the cabin, and I could decompress and talk to her about what was going on that was causing me to be stressed. And, you know, I could not have done it without her. She was there for me every step of the way. And that's true in every area of our life. You know, she's there for me to support me and help me whenever I need that. So what a blessing that is. And I know the rest of the guys out there feel the same way. The second spousal responsibility I wanted to talk about was being a faithful wife. We read in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, "Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous." You know, it's a really alarming statistic to see that 50% of American marriages end in divorce. And that's difficult. It's difficult for the people involved in that and the families. But statistic I found was that 30% of Christian marriages end in divorce. And they're basing that on churchgoers. And of course, we know that not everybody that goes to church is really living a Christian life. So it's probably even lower than that. So that's why it's so important for Christians to do the best that they can in their marriages and be faithful. And the third spousal responsibility that I wanted to mention was being a faithful friend. We see in John 15, verse 13, it says, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends." You know, I used to think that was more like, dying for someone. But as I thought about it and looked at this, I think it's really also talking about, maybe even more so, laying down your life in terms of making sacrifices for your spouse. Being willing to put your needs aside for the one that you love. So, and that's not always easy. It's not always easy, but it's so important. And for a marriage to be successful, that's something that really has to happen. Thirdly, I wanted to talk about the faithful woman in terms of parental responsibilities. What a blessing it is for a child to have a faithful Christian mother. And I mentioned my mom, and she was a great mom, but she was not a strong Christian. And fortunately, I had other women in my life that were a good influence on me in terms of that. And it's great to see my wife and my daughters that, who are strong Christians and that they are a blessing to their children. But, this is such an important responsibility for a woman. We read in 1 Timothy 2:15, "Yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control." So huge, huge responsibility. In Proverbs 22:6, we see, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And that can be difficult with our children. It doesn't always go as smooth as we want with our children, as we all know who have children. But you know what? We need to never give up. And this is a promise that God has given us in the scriptures. And the old saying is, "It ain't over till it's over." And we have to remember that with our children and stick with them and watch as they finally get to where we want them to be. We see in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, where we're talking about Lois and Eunice, Timothy's grandmother and mother. It says, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well." So what a great example that is of how his faith was passed down from his grandmother to his mother to him. We have a family picture, and it's of 5 generations. And in that picture is my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, and my nephew. So there was 5 generations, which is pretty amazing. You certainly don't see that very often. And my sister's family, they're having some problems right now. There's some lack of communication. They're not getting along very well. They had a wedding, and there were some problems at the wedding, and it's really sad to see that. And I was looking at that picture, and I was thinking about that. It's like, unfortunately, my great-grandmother was not a spiritual woman, and it was passed down to my grandmother on that side, and to my mother, and my sister is, and I'm thankful for that. And then, and I just wonder how much of the problems that they're having right now in the family was caused by a lack of a strong spiritual woman to set that example. So that is such an important thing. Along with being a faithful mother in terms of parental responsibilities, it's also important for the woman to be a faithful home provider. Now, let's face it, guys. The woman no matter if she works in the home or out of it, is in charge of the home. Thank goodness. I mean, guys, let's think about it. Do you remember what it was like when you were single and you had an apartment? It was not a pretty picture, okay? Like, I remember my apartment before Susan and I got married. I always knew when it was time to do dishes. And here's when it was time to do dishes. When I went to get something to eat, and there were no plates, there were no cups, there's no silverware, and everything was piled on the counter, and the sink was full. That meant it was time to do dishes. I mean, I thought that's the way that it was, you know. So fortunately, Susan now has me trained so that when I have a sandwich or something, there's a plate, I go to the sink and I take the wand and I clean the plate off and I rinse it and I put it in the dish drainer, okay? And I wash everything else and I put it in the dish drainer. But I had to be trained, you know, I didn't know how to do that. So thank goodness God has put the woman in charge of the home. You know, we read in Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31, a great narrative on the woman in the home. And it's a long section of scripture, but I really think it's important to read it. And it just paints the picture of a woman in the home. So let me read that now. Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds a distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes covering for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. I know a lot of those things have changed today, but I think that just paints a wonderful image of what it means to have a great Christian woman in the home. Okay, so we've talked today about a faithful Christian woman, what her spiritual responsibilities are, what her spousal responsibilities are, and what her parental responsibilities are. And hopefully, I've included something for all the women that are out there today. And I want us all to remember that the contributions of faithful, godly Christian women often go unheralded, but their contributions are an integral and vital part the church. We have women right here in our congregation that find themselves in so many different situations. We have single women, married women, widows, single moms, married mothers and grandmothers. We have young women, middle-aged women, and older women. We have women from many different cultures and backgrounds. We have women who work in the home, and those who work outside of the home, and of course, those who do both. Fortunately, we have so many who are a wonderful example of what it means to be a faithful Christian woman. So this morning, we thank you. And we thank God for the blessings that you bring to our lives every day.